kind of a perspective or flavor to our discussion this evening. So help me with questions following our discussion. The problem, I call it, or philosophers rather call this, the problem of evil and suffering. First and foremost, evil is real. I mean, if you just have to look around you and you'll see evil is real. The reality of evil is the most undisputed truth that all humanity can come to realize. Evil is there. And I'll share with you some examples of evil. When you open your password, open your computer, or open your iPhone, or turn on your iPhone or whatever, the very first thing you do is to put in your password. By putting in your password, you acknowledge that evil exists. Because if there was no evil, everybody would be honest and nobody would need any password for anything. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing if you don't have to remember all your passwords? The mere fact that you put in passwords in your devices is an indication that evil exists. Contracts, when you sign contracts, again, is another result of the reality of evil. Why can't you just take my word for it? I'm honest, but we're not. We have to sign contracts. The existence of police officers is an indication that evil exists. Even the mere fact that you carry your keys with you, even though keys now have become obsolete, but just having a key to open a door or to unlock an office is an indication that evil does exist. So evil is all around us. And I wanted to share with you an image. If I share my screen, I'll share with you an image that I will get back to or come back to in a second. And let me close this. You can see my screen. I trust you can see my screen. Joe, if you can give me a thumbs up, yes? Or you can say yes. Okay, perfect. Excellent. Thank you. So evil has been labeled by atheists, non-believers, as the rock of atheism. The rock of atheism. Some God of love you are. Why did you do this? And this, you can see this man is so angry at God. Why did you allow my beloved grandmother or grandfather or spouse or whatever, my loved one, why did they die? Why are you so evil? Let me share with you the problem. But before I go into the problem, I want to share with you two types of evil, and I'm going to share them here with you on this screen. Two types of evil. Two types and two perspectives. And let me unshare my screen for a second. Okay. What are the two types and what are the two perspectives of evil? There is the moral evil and there's the natural evil. What's the moral evil? The moral evil is the evil we do, sin, the bad things we do, lying, cheating, killing, all of the things that we do that are sinful. The sin we do is categorized as or classified as moral evil. There's another type of evil that is the natural evil, the evil we suffer. Earthquakes, tsunamis, disease, cancer, coronavirus pandemic, that's part of the natural evil. So there's moral and there's natural. Now, there are two perspectives. So I said to you earlier, there are two types and two perspectives, or two ways to address the problem of evil. There's the logical and there's the emotional. The logical deals with the origin of evil. Where did evil come from? The logical deals with the emotion, the origin of evil, and the logical asks the question, how can God, a loving God, allow evil to exist? The logical also says, I need to understand and comprehend the problem of evil in the existence of a loving God. Comprehend and understand. To address this challenge, we must utilize the tools of logic and reason. And this perspective speaks to the head. Now, there's another perspective, which is the emotional, that speaks to the heart. The emotional perspective or the emotional vantage point of evil does not say, where did evil come from, origin, but it asks for the purpose. Why do I suffer? It also says, where is God in my suffering, in my pain, in my trials and tribulation? To address this challenge, I don't utilize the tools of logic and reason. I appeal to the promises of God in the scriptures, because they speak not only to the head, but more importantly to the heart. So I hope that makes sense to you. I hope you're able to grasp what I'm trying to convey. The two types of evil, the moral and the natural, and two ways we can address the problem of evil: the logical, that speaks to how can God exist when there's evil in this world, and then the emotional, why do I suffer, where is God in my suffering, and so on and so forth. For the sake, I will be able to discuss all of these, but I think the first few meetings, we will address the logical, apologetic, cerebral problem of evil, and then, God willing, if God allows, in the next few weeks, we will move into the existential, the emotional, the pastoral perspective of evil. So let's look at the intellectual perspective, and let's look at the problem. What is the problem of evil? Let me share my screen once again and share and explain or show you on the screen what is the problem of evil. Here's the problem of evil. The problem is in a form of a syllogism or an argument, a philosophical argument that says, an all-powerful God would be able to destroy evil. That's a premise that is assumed to be true. The other premise, an all-loving God would want to destroy evil. Okay, seems like it's another logical premise. Another major premise, or in this case, minor premise, evil exists. Well, what's the conclusion? Therefore, an all-powerful and all-loving God does not exist. That is the problem that atheists, non-believers, skeptics alike use to substantiate their position as atheists or skeptics. Or they defend their position by saying, if he's all powerful, he can get rid of evil. If he's all loving, he would want to get rid of evil. Yet, evil exists. Therefore, either your God is not all powerful or all loving, or he doesn't exist altogether. As Christians and as believers, how can we respond to this charge? It seems, first glance, when you read this argument or problem of evil, it seems to be very logical. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, I'm assuming you probably are nodding your head. Yeah, it seems logical. It seems very reasonable. What's the problem? Well, in philosophy, in logic, or if you've taken philosophy 101, and if you've taken argumentation styles and all of that, you know that if you don't like the conclusion, if you don't think that the conclusion makes sense, you have to go back and look at the premises based on which the conclusion is inferred. So if the conclusion is something is wrong with it, let's go and check the premises and see if the premises are true, factual, or false, and have problems in their reasoning and logic. Now, this is when I wish I was with you in person, because it's very difficult to go through something like that from just me speaking and you listening. This is when I would ask you to raise your hand and say, what do you see? What's the problem with this argument? So I'm going to try to do that. If any of you would like to raise your hand, or Joe, if you can unmute everyone and see if someone can, in 30 seconds or less, tell us what's the problem with the problem of evil.
You want me to unmute everybody?
I don't know if I can see people raising hands, but you can unmute everyone, and I trust that you'll only speak if you have a question or if you have a comment to answer that question. I'm trying to make this as interactive as possible. Right, Sandra raised her hand, so can you speak, Sandra, please? Now we can mute everyone and listen to Sandra.
I think the problem with that is the fact that evil is necessary for us to know what's not evil. So it's not matters of God creating evil or not, but it's the fact that, well, it's created by us, but if it's not there, then we wouldn't know what's not evil.
Want to raise their hand? Very good, Sandra. Anyone else want to take a shot at this?
A lack of free will.
Speak, say more, Dina, because I like what you're saying, where you're going.
If God is able to destroy evil, and then we don't have the free will to choose whether we want to do his will or not.
Excellent. Very good. What does that say about God? That's the question. Excellent. All right. Anyone else? Last chance. Anyone else? You can unmute yourself and speak if you want.
Well, like that says that God is loving because he's giving us the choice. He's not like an evil dictator. He's giving us the choice because it would be better for us to choose the good option while having both options than just being kind of forced to have just one.
Excellent. Is this Marina?
Yeah.
Beautifully said. Yes, very, very good. All right.
George,
yes, sir.
One more answer in the chat.
Can you read it off, please, Rob?
It says, I think it has to do with who defines evil. What is evil? If there is evil, then there is good. This is from Mark Mamluk.
Excellent. Beautifully said, Mark. All right. Good answers to all of you. Now let's dissect this problem and see how we can unpack the faulty logic in these premises. They may seem to be logical and reasonable, but they're not. Let's unpack it. First of all, we have, as some of you mentioned, the free will response. That's it's also in academic terms. I don't want to bore you with academic terminology, but the response to the problem of evil is called theodicy. Theodicy. Theo means God. DC means the justice of God. Diki in Greek or in Coptic means justice. When you say dikeos in Coptic, it means the just. So theodicy means the justice of God in light of the problem of evil. Anyways, the free will response, or the free will theodicy, says, an all-loving God gives the gift of free will. True or false? An all-loving God gives the gift of free will. Why is that? Because if I love someone, that love necessitates for me to give freedom to the beloved, or else it wouldn't be called love. Now, let alone the all-loving God, whose love is perfect. He, because he loves us perfectly, because he's perfect, he gives us what is necessary for this love to be meaningful. Well, what is necessary for love to be meaningful and to be realized? Freedom. If you love your spouse and you ask him or her to forcibly to love you back regardless, then that wouldn't be called love, let alone the perfect love of God. Now, an all-powerful God cannot give love, as you see on the screen, and take it away. That doesn't mean that I'm all-powerful. I can give you the gift of free love, yet take it away. God cannot do what is logically contradicting. To give you something and to take it away is the logical contradiction. God cannot do that. Not because of a limitation in God's power, but because it does not align with God's perfection. Let me explain. Can God create a square circle? That's a logical contradiction. It's a logical impossibility. How can you create a square circle? You can't. Now, does that mean that God is not all powerful? He's not all he's not omnipotent. He's lacking power and ability because he cannot create a square circle? Well, a square circle does not exist. That doesn't say anything about God's power. So God's power and God's love is all powerful and is all loving. Does not mean he can give me something and take it away. Do you know that there's a verse in the scriptures? It's in Titus. If you look at Titus, the second or third verse, St. Paul is saying, God who cannot lie. Does that mean that God is unable to do something? He can't lie. See, I saw a deficiency in God's attribute. Well, what is lie? What is lying? Lying is not telling the truth. What is God? Who is God? God is the God of truth. He said of himself, I am the truth. How can the truth be the truth and not be the truth, i.e. lie, in the same time? Do you see the logical impossibility in that? Let's make it clear and listen to what C.S. Lewis said, a great author and apologist. He said something I believe is so beautiful to this point. He said, if you choose to say God can give a creature free will and at the same time withhold free will from it, you have not succeeded in saying anything about God. Meaningless combination of words do not suddenly acquire meaning simply because we prefix to them the two other words, God can. See, I think C.S. Lewis said it far more eloquently than I attempted to do. Meaningless combination of words do not suddenly acquire meaning simply because we prefix to them the two other words, God can. In other words, God cannot do that which is logically impossible. So, God created us as being capable to, as the slide here says, freely love him. Now, this love on any other basis than free will would not be love. Well, here's the point I'm trying to make at the very end. Freely loving God also means freely ignoring God. And from that, evil emerges. That is what evil is. When you freely turn your back from God. I hope this made sense and addressed the first point I'm trying to make. And I think someone raised his or her hand. I want to see if this is all right. Okay. This free will response suits perfectly the moral evil, but what about the natural evil? We did not discuss the natural evil yet. This is going to come in the 4th, 5th, or 6th meeting. So if it's not relevant to what we're saying now, I would wait until either the end of the discussion and then ask the question. But we are this problem of evil and suffering, my dear friends. When I gave these classes in the seminary, it took 6 weeks to cover from beginning to end. So you're with me for the long haul here. We're going to be covering this for the next month and a half of 2 months. Hopefully, we'll be able to address all your questions, and if not, I will allow time for Q&A at the end. Awesome, thank you, and you are most welcome. Please ask away if needed. All right, here's what Dr. Ravi Zacharias said, and I will share my screen so that you can all see with me as well. Here's what he said. He said the following. When you are loved by someone, Ravi Zacharias, by the way, I'm assuming you all know who he is, and I shouldn't have done that. He's a Christian author, an apologist, a defender of the faith. He's written several books on the defense of the Christian faith. He said, when you are loved by someone who has been hardwired to love you, you find yourself alone. Why? Because the beloved doesn't love you by choice. The beloved loves by compulsion, which is not love. Few other excerpts that I want to share with you. Here's what C.S. Lewis also said, and I will move on to the next point. The reason why I'm spending some time to discuss this point of why if God is all loving, he wouldn't get rid of evil. If he's all powerful, he would be able to. Because our youth, and our children, you know, they get challenged by non-believers and atheists and skeptics with this argumentation. And I will tell you, my son, Daniel, many of you know who he is, 5-6 years ago, he came and asked me this question. And he said, you know, some of my friends in school are saying, you know, the Christian God is all loving. Christian God is all powerful. Now I'm talking about someone who was 9 years old 5-6 years ago. And, you know, and there's a lot of evil in this world. How can I answer this question? So our kids are exposed to this worldview of atheism and skepticism, naturalism, and postmodernism, all of these isms that are aimed to discredit the truth of Christianity. We ought to be equipped not only for ourselves, which is first and foremost, to be able to address those questions, but also when our children or grandchildren ask us those questions, we should be able to intelligently and intellectually address them. Here's what C.S. Lewis said. God created us with free will. That means creatures which can go either wrong or right. Some people think they can imagine a creature which was free but had no possibility of going wrong. I cannot. If I am free to be good, I am also free to be bad. And free will is what has made evil possible. Why then did God give us free will? Because it is the only thing that makes possible any love or goodness or joy worth having. A world of creatures that worked like machines would hardly be worth creating. So because the question may beg itself, well, okay, I see that evil came from free will. Well, why did God create us with free will? I think C.S. Lewis addresses that question beautifully. All right. Without the possibility of turning our backs on God, we are not humans, we are robots. And God did not intend to have a loving relationship with his special creations, us, humanity, as robots and machines. I once asked, have you ever have you ever thought of having a loving relationship with your computer, with your phone, or and I didn't mean to mention phone because some people do have a loving relationship with their phone. But anyways, imagine you do have a loving relationship with a machine. how fulfilling and satisfying is that relationship when this inanimate object cannot freely love you back. That's the relationship God wants to develop between us, him being the source of love and us being the recipients of this love, and reciprocate that love back to him. So, and I have an image of a car. When you are given this gift of free will and you abuse it, would you blame God for giving you this gift, or would you blame yourself for abusing this gift? The analogy I would like to draw is this. When you're driving a car recklessly and you're speeding when you shouldn't be speeding, and you get into an accident, God forbid, and you get hurt, do you blame Ford or Cadillac, or do you blame yourself? You don't blame the manufacturer of the car, assuming that it was, was manufactured well. You blame yourself for misusing or abusing the gift that was given to you, and that is the origin of evil. St. Augustine said something so beautiful about the problem of evil. He said, "Such is the generosity of God's goodness, that he has not refrained from creating even that creature which he foreknew would not only sin, but remain in the will to sin. As a runaway horse is better than a stone which does not run away, because it lacks self-movement and sense perception. So the creature is more excellent which sins by free will than that which does not sin only because it has no free will." You have to read this a couple of times to fully understand and grasp what St. Augustine is saying. In essence, God foreknew that we will sin because of our free will. And he, even though he knew that we will sin, he continued with his sovereign plan of creating us, rather than not creating people with free will and only to do that which is good, i.e. robots. So I want to pause. There's a couple of more questions that I want to share with you that will address this point of free will, but I want to pause and see if there are any questions related to what we have been discussing so far. You can raise your hand.
Hi, George. This is David. I have a question.
Hi, David, Habibi. Yes.
So I think you probably had this discussion with non-Christians as well. Can you share some of the common rebuttals people give to this line of argumentation?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Very good question. It is interesting that the rebuttal is not so much given to the logical problem of evil, but to the emotional problem of evil. There are two famous atheists. Okay, let me back up. Someone by the name of Alvin Plantinga, who is a Christian author and apologist, and he wrote a book called Evil, Pain, and Suffering, something like that, or Evil, Suffering, and Pain. In it, he interviewed so many atheists that came out and said that the logical problem of evil is very difficult to refute. Let me rephrase this. The response to the logical problem of evil is very difficult to refute. If you don't know who God is, then you don't know his attributes, meaning all powerful and all loving. Or you're misusing his attributes of love and power, thinking that power can do the illogical, and love means give me something and take it back. So you're either not fully understanding the God you're denying, or you're using his attributes illogically, creating a logical impossibility. In short, to answer your question, David, the rebuttal is more towards the moral, the emotional problem. Why does God allow suffering rather than the existence of evil itself? One thing I did hear on a college campus from a bunch of atheists, very intellectual atheists, when I discuss the problem of evil and suffering, they say the following, and actually Richard Dawkins, who's one of the most famous atheists alive out of Oxford University, he said the following: I would much rather be unfree. I don't want to have free will. And his worldview, his atheistic worldview, leads to a conclusion of determinism. In other words, I am a machine. I'm hardwired to say certain things and to act in certain ways. I don't want to be free if freedom will give me evil. And I heard to your question, that is the only rebuttal that I heard from atheists. Now, what do you say to them when they say, I don't believe in free will? If you go online and go to Richard Dawkins, who's, like I said, one of the most famous atheists now, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, all of these big names are the great atheists of our age. Type their names and type free will and determinism. You will see that all of them are saying we are determined, we don't want to be free. Now, my rebuttal to them, when they refute my argument or attempt to refute this argument, I go back and I ask them two questions. You say that you are determined and you're not free. Were you determined to say that you are determined, not free? In other words, those words that you just uttered, were you free to actually utter those words, or were you determined to say these words? That's first question. Second question, all of those people that I mentioned to you are married, and they say they are not free, but they are determined, predestined to say certain things and to act in certain ways. I would say to them, my dear friend, have you tried to tell your spouse, i.e. wife, that you are determined to love them? I would love to know the response of your wife when you utter those words. Because if you don't love your spouse freely, then love becomes meaningless. That's not called love. I mean, do you see where I'm going with? I hope you're seeing where I'm going with that. Love can only be love when it is freely given and freely received. So what they say is inconsistent with how they live their lives. We always say, practice what you preach. To the atheists, I would say, preach what you practice. If you practice free love, then why don't you preach free love? But they realize that this is inconsistent with their atheism. We can talk about that again in another time, but I hope that addresses your question. Any other question? Now it's 7:46, so I want to go over two more slides. Why don't I just go over two more slides and then open it for questions for everyone? Just give me 3 more minutes and I will finish with that. I hope you're all okay with that. So I just want to share with you the 2 slides. And am I sharing my screen? Okay, good. I am sharing my screen. Good. Here is the creator's option. To either, let's just assume God had 4 options. Of course, that is not the case because of the all-knowing power of God, or all-knowing nature and attribute of God. He did not just come up and say, let me think, what should I do? That is not how God works. But let's just assume that's the case from our limited perspective. He could have created nothing. Or he could have created being who cannot choose. Being who cannot choose. Being who do not have any choice. Or he could have created being who can only choose good. Or he could have created being who can freely choose between good and bad. In which of these 4 scenarios will you be able to find meaningful, loving relationship? Well, not the first, because there's nothing to love and to offer and receive. Being who cannot choose, well, there's no love, because I can't choose anything. Love is only love if it's based on freedom, or free will rather. Being who can only choose good, well, I am determined to love God. I have no other option. That's compulsion. That's not love. Being who can freely choose between good and bad, only in this scenario will you have meaningful love. So let me close by the following summary of the free will defense or theodicy. And I think this, I want to make sure you all pay attention to this, because this kind of summarizes the whole thing all together in one beautiful slide. Where there's love, there's what? Based on what we said, there's freedom. Where there's love, there's freedom. Where there's freedom, there's a choice. Freedom is of no value, of no use, if there's no choice. If there's freedom, there's a choice. If there's love, there's freedom. If there's freedom, there's a choice. Where there's a choice, there's what? An opportunity and the possibility of evil. Because now I can choose to either love or not love. And where there's evil, there's the possibility of suffering. From there, my friends, we can understand the evil and suffering in this world as a result of the free will that we have, which is a result of the love of God that we so much treasure. And when we meet next time, God willing, we will understand, we'll try to make this connection between the love of God, which we just saw in the beginning, and suffering, which as a result, believe it or not, sometimes, not all the time, sometimes a result of the free will and the love of God, and how this suffering does not contradict the love of God, because out of it, you will reap blessings and benefits over blessings once you begin to understand the meaning of suffering. And that is, again, another discussion that we will have. So I hope this explains or sheds some light on the problem of evil and suffering from an apologetic, philosophical perspective. Now, I would like to, I see a lot of questions in the chat. Now I'm gonna be quiet and let's listen to your questions. Can we see slide 17? Sure, you can see slide 17. Let me share that with you again. Oh, no, I'm not gonna share with you slide. A very good question. Okay, fine. Slide 17 was just an explanation. It's a little personal, so I'll share it with you anyway, since you asked. Here is slide 17. Of course, I know where it came from, and thanks for whoever asked this question. All right. If this is my wife and I with His Grace Bishop Angelus, and I'm speaking about love and freedom. I said, I deeply love my wife, Miranda. Suppose all I had to do to hear her say, I love you, was to push a button in her back or in her arm. Would that be real love? Of course, it wouldn't be. And this is just an illustration of what we have been saying earlier. All right, another question.
George.
Can you, yes, sir.
Sorry, two people had their hand up, and I have.
Yes, let's look at the, yeah, please, can you unmute whoever is raising their hand, please?
Sure. John Bassilios, go ahead.
Okay.
I had a quick question. So based on the last slide that you just shared of the logical steps of where there is choice, there is evil, and all of that, is that kind of like why it doesn't make sense that COVID-19 is an evil act, because it's not necessarily something that was created by choice or by freedom of some sort, I guess. So that's why it is something that is, even if God allowed for it, maybe it's something that is fruitful and useful in some ways that we are unable to see.
Excellent question, John. Excellent question. Now, let's be clear, and I'm glad that you bring that back to current events. Now, Evil is evil. Okay? Sickness, disease are evil that we suffer. So that why don't we just call them suffering? Okay? Not all suffering is evil, but it is a bad thing that God allowed. I cannot say COVID-19 is a wonderful thing. Of course not. Because you can't, and the scriptures also says, you can't call that which is evil good and call that which is good evil. So what happened is that God allowed for or created the possibility of evil. Man created the actuality of evil. Do you see the difference? How did God create the possibility of evil? By giving us free will. We created the actuality of evil by working on this free will. So evil is evil. It is, you cannot say that cancer, for example, is a wonderful thing. Absolutely not. It's bad. Coronavirus is bad. But the result, what God can make out of it, is good. Do you see? Perfect. Thank you, John. Good question. Any other questions?
Nancy Gerges,
yes.
her hand up.
Nancy,
Go ahead and
yes.
ask Nancy. Or she disappeared.
Yes, George, for the example that you mentioned earlier about the reckless driver, what if he had other innocent passengers who died in that car crash or car accident? Like, what's your feedback or opinion about those innocent souls who died in that
Very
car
good.
crash?
Excellent question, Nancy. This is, remember there was one theodicy or one response that I shared with you today, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, let me share my screen once again. And for a second here, I will, oops, let's see, where is it? It's all the way down here. There you go. Do you see the slide on the screen that says the greater good and our limited perspective?
Yeah, I can see that one.
Perfect. This is going to be a discussion in about 2 or 3 weeks. What about those who are inflicted with pain and suffering, whom we think are innocent bystanders? What's going on with them? So that will address your question if you stay with us for the next couple of meetings.
Okay, I just had a question because the driver had the free will because you said he was reckless, but those other people didn't die because of their free will. So that was my concern.
Excellent. But I know that's a very good question. And I will just give you a couple of words and then we'll expand on this when we meet again in a couple of weeks.
Sure.
That even though there were innocent bystanders, do you think, or do we think that that God, for example, forgot the fact that, or not forgot, but wasn't sovereign in his almighty sovereign power to save those bystanders or those innocent people in the car? No, there is a plan for them to be in this place, even though he used the free will of the driver. Why forget the example of the driver? What about all the innocent people that died in all the catastrophic, like the World Trade Center attack, for example, in 9/11?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of people that died that we think are innocent, and those pilots that flew the planes in the World Trade Centers exercised their free will. What happened to all the 3,000 that died in those buildings? So
yeah.
We'll address this in details as we meet, as I said to you, Nancy. But God have this greater good, even though we think they were innocent bystanders, which indeed very well could be innocent, but there is something that God sees beyond what we see. So that death, that tragedy that took the life of those people will yield something greater for everyone in this world. And we will understand with some examples as we discuss this in details later.
Thank you, George. Thank you.
You're welcome, Nancy. Any other questions? You guys have very good questions, and keep them coming. It's 7:57, so keep in mind. Yeah, I know I want to be respectful of your time, but if you guys have more questions, please speak up.
So I have a couple of questions here in the chat, George.
Yes.
One was about 20 minutes ago. But it said, God could have created free humans that freely choose good, not evil, while also love God and God loves them back. So it's more of a comment rather than a question.
No, I disagree. Because, again, based on what we have been saying for the past 25 minutes, God could have created free beings, free human beings that can only love him back. There's a contradiction in this statement. You cannot be free unless you have a choice, or else you are not free. You are compelled to love, but you're only free if you have a choice. Well, what is the choice? Love or no love? If there's no choice, there's no freedom. If there's no freedom, there's no love. And God created on the basis of love, not no love. What's the other question?
Sure. So this one is a little long. I'll read it and I can send it to you if you want. But it says, Job had free will to love God, and he did. Satan asked God to give him the capacity to do evil to Job. Why did God let Satan make Job suffer for many, many years when God knew he would choose him anyway? I understand that God wants us to go through the narrow door, but thinking of Job, he was God's servant since the beginning, and he had free will to choose good, but he suffered anyway.
Excellent question. Now, to the person who asked this question, I recommend for him or her to read Job all the way to the end. Sometimes we read, let's say, half the novel and blame or complain that the author is not setting things right. Well, why don't you read the entire novel, the entire story, and you'll see that there's a happy ending at the end. So let me explain to you to this question. Job actually protested and said, God, if you read Job 30, 20 to 33, he said, I cry out to you. You do not answer my prayers. You have been cruel to me. Job calls God cruel. With the strength of your hand, you oppose me. You spoil my success. Why are you doing this to me? Job has been demanding an answer. And he's been complaining and complaining and complaining. Why are you doing this? We may be doing the same thing now in reference to the coronavirus. But do you know what God said to Job? God said to Job, are you done with all your questions? Finished? Now can I give you my answers to your questions, Job? And this is how God deals with us when we cry out, why? Why are you letting innocent people hurt? Why bad things happen to good people? God began asking Job over 66 questions. And I would advise you to go over chapters 38 to 40 and read the 66 questions God asked Job. He asked Job if he was present when he laid the foundation of the earth, if he understood the laws by which the tides of the seas were controlled. He asked him about the habits of the various birds and animals, and so on and so forth. Now, these questions were designed to convey two important truths, one about Job and the other about God. What is the truth about Job? It is to convey to Job, or to remind Job, rather, of his limited perspective. He does not know everything. About God, it reveals the wisdom and the power of God. And these are the two important truths that God wanted to send to Job, and he's sending to all of us when we are struggling with, why are you letting bad things happen to good people? The Lord is basically asking Job for one question, or telling Job one thing: you do not know what is going on. Remember your limited perspective and trust me. Now, We don't see all things working together for good. Did Job? No. Why not? Because we're not God. What God was saying to Job is this: I am God, you are not. And it's amazing how easy it is for us to forget that. He is God and we are not. That's why I said that the most supreme level of knowledge we all must strive to attain is the knowledge of our ignorance. Now, at the very end, what did Job do? For the person who asked this question, Job said the following. He said in Job 42, read chapter 42, verses 2 to 6. After all the suffering that was inflicted upon Job, see what Job said? I now know that you can do everything. I'm reading to you the verses. And that no purpose of yours can be withheld from you. I have, listen to this, I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me which I did not know. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes sees you, or my eye sees you. Therefore, I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. If I were to ask Job today, if I had a line connected me to Job in heaven today or in paradise today, I would ask him, Job, if we were to do it over again, would you just delete that part of your life and omit it and bypass that suffering part of your life? Guess what he would say? Absolutely not. It was the greatest blessing of my life, because it was through this suffering that I was able to what? See the hands of God. This, my dear friends, is mature, solid faith that we need to strive to attain. I hope I answered your question.
All right. One last question that I have here. It says,
Last question, so that it's already 5 minutes over, and I don't want to keep you here for too long. Go ahead.
yes, I understand the concept of free will, but if at the end of the day there is a right choice and it even results in something as severe as hell, how is that just or fair or fully free will?
Yeah. Well, now that takes us to, this is a loaded question. I don't want to talk about the problem, because the problem of evil and suffering includes in it also some of the questions of hell. Now, hell was created, let's just very briefly answer this question. Hell was not created for human beings. According to the scriptures, hell was created for Satan and his demons and his powers. Now, those who continue to reject the love of God and insist on rejecting God freely with their free will, they insist on rejecting God. Because of the love of God, God allowed for them a place that is far away from him so that they can freely get what they have chosen here on earth. C.S. Lewis put it perfectly. He said, at the end of time, there will be two types of people. Those who have said to God all along, thy will be done. And those to whom God will say, thy will be done. In other words, I get to choose hell with my free will. And what is hell? Is to continue and to insist and continue to reject the love of God. Now, we can think of it this way. If God is being rejected by some, let's say, non-believers, God will say, okay, fine, you reject me, you're going to go to hell. That's not how God works. This is human language. Hey, you brought this onto yourself. This is your problem. Now you get to suffer for eternity because you rejected me. That is not how God works. This is how we work with one another sometimes. But God continues until your last breath on this earth. He continues to knock on your door, the door of your heart. He continues to send you messages, to send you people your way to bring you the love of God. He wants you. He died for you. He paid a hefty price for you. And we know from the scriptures that he wants all to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. As a father, he hurts when he sees someone continuing to reject him. So he does this day in and day out. But if at your till the last breath you insist on rejecting him, because our God is a gentleman, and he's not going to force you to do something against your will. He's going to grant you your wishes. So I say to those, I'd like to conclude by this. Those who are in hell are going to be singing Frank Sinatra's song. You know what that is? I did it my way. In other words, it is their choice to choose for themselves the destiny that they so chose. If God were to force them to go to heaven, this heaven would be hell for them because they rejected it all their lives. Glory and honor be to God forever and ever. Amen. Thank you very much for all these wonderful questions. Keep them coming. I would like to, as Joe mentioned, we're going to take a break next week to focus on the Passion of the Lord, Holy Week. And let us pray for one another. Let us pray for the health and the safety and the blessings for everyone that is suffering through this pandemic. Let us be radiants of or instruments of joy and hope and peace and comfort to everyone around us. And God willing, we'll meet again on the 20th of April to continue to discuss the problem of evil and suffering. Until then, you all stay blessed and have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Thank you, George.